Hatha on opening the sutra. The Dharma incomparably profound and infinitely subtle is rarely encountered even in millions of ages. Now we see it, hear it, receive and maintain it. May we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning. One for emphasis. So thank you all for being here today and this week. This is a new gig for me, especially at session. So when do I have until? Wow. It's okay, I brought notes. So today we are in the midst of this matter of sewing the robe, whether you're initiate or not. If you've gone through this process, you know where this is going. We are in the midst of the matter of sewing the robe. This robe is a symbol within Buddhism. It's kind of the symbol of those people who take up this particular way of practice. And it's got a good story. It's got a really nice story. Robed mendicants or monks and way seekers and such, this was not something that was new in the world when Shakyamuni was, wandering about, finding his way, approaching his realization. It was a thing to get to a certain age, younger for some, older for others, and renounce the world, your name, your identity, and to go off and to seek and to give up the family, to give up the household, to give up the possessions, to give up the clothing, and to garb yourself in some way that represented that you were on a path, that you were doing something spiritual, something other than being a householder. And so this was the way for the Buddha's early followers too. As the story often gets told, new members to the Sangha, and again, to be in the Sangha at that time was to be a monk or a nun. They would renounce their status as a householder, and they would go to the charnel grounds. They would go to the place where the bodies were burned, and they would gather discarded fabric, and they would sew this into the robe and something to garb themselves, and then they would dye it so it was all more or less the same color. But then there came this story, this king in the region, Bimbisara. And King Bimbisara was a follower of the Buddha. He had not renounced, but he was a patron of the Buddha and the Sangha, and he made offerings, and he if he came across monks or the Buddha himself, or nuns, he would make offerings, as was the way with with this time. And as the story goes, King Bimbisara saw a mendicant coming down the way, and he got down off of his horse, and he went to make offerings to this person, and he saw it was some other flavor of way seeker, not a member of Buddha's Sangha. And in my mind, this image of him getting rather bent out of shape about the whole thing. Go to all the trouble of getting down off the horse. And so the next time he had the opportunity to see Shakyamuni, he made this point, is you need to standardize. You need what you're doing to be visibly recognizable so that those people who want to support you in your Sangha can, not be wasted the bother of getting down off the horse if it's just, some other schmo way seeker. And so, as the story goes, Ananda, who was an attendant of the Buddha and the Buddha's cousin, was walking with him. And it came to that they were walking by rows of rice fields, and the way rice fields are arranged, the farmers go in very particular pathways through them, and so there are these well-trod sort of pathways through. And the Buddha said to Ananda, it says, I need you to make the robe that will be the robe of the Sangha, and this is how to make it. And that was the instruction Ananda got. And when the next time Buddha and Ananda got together, many had already followed the pattern devised by Ananda, which is kind of what we see now with the Raksu and the Okesa, this field of panels made of pieces sewn together. And again, arguments back and forth about the historiography, but this was 2,600 years ago. There's lots of credible evidence that, rice fields were in India 4,500 years ago. This is quite likely. And if not, it's still a great story. And as the tradition went on, when the Buddha confirmed the awakening of Mahakayasapa, when he passed the torch, as it were, we use the symbol of the robe and the bowl, that this is what is transmitted. And it becomes a symbol of the monastic life. It stayed a symbol of the monastic life and the priesthood. And as we changed our view of who the Sangha was, and we see cultures doing the precepts and doing things like Jukai for lay people, that the Sangha is accessible to those who do not necessarily, abandon all aspects of their home life. It is still the robe and the bowl that we see in our Oryoki practice that continues to transmit itself forward and remain powerful symbols within the practice. That first bowl, that largest bowl, is referred to as the Buddha bowl. And when you're a big Oryoki nerd and you get into the minutiae about it, there's all sorts of special little protocols around that first bowl, which are fun for Oryoki nerds. But again, like with the robe and the way we care for the robe, these are all things to reinforce the importance of what is being offered by the teaching of this thing. Dogen was an ardent promoter of this teaching that the robe itself is the very body of the Buddha's teaching. I'm going to misquote probably, but I think it was Suzuki Roshi, Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, who said, wear the kesa and sit zazen. That's the practice. And this authentic teaching of the robe has been transmitted through 86 generations to our abbot. And then to his heir, sensei, and those teachings offered to us in so many ways in this training matrix. And endless gratitude for them, for this availability, that this is possible and exists here in Toledo. If the Buddha's robe is the embodiment of the full teaching of the Buddha, how much merit is there in that robe? All the sutras, all the books, you look out in that library. Well, don't look now, they're covered at session, don't look at books. But so much has been written to try to express this teaching, because the merit of this teaching that alleviates suffering has transmitted, it's been felt, it's been seen, it's been confirmed, it's been realized for 2,600 years. This might be Dogen, but there's 4 levels of doing good, they say, in one of the teachings. That the lowest level of doing good is to avoid the lowest level of doing good is to avoid maintaining an evil that already exists in the world. If you don't feed an evil, that's good. If you can end an existing evil, that's better. If you can maintain a good that already exists in the world, that's better yet. And at the very top, the very best that you can do is that you can bring into existence a good that has not existed before. How much more merit is there in this robe to bring it into existence through your own efforts? Stitch at a time. And yet, we also hear there's only the one robe. Mahakayashapa's robe was an extension of Shakyamuni's robe. James Ford's robe is an extension of Jude Kennett's robe. Roshi's robe is an extension of his teacher's robe, and so on and so on. Our robes, an extension of Rinsen and Doan's robes. So this is not, in essence, an artifact. It's not the original robe, but it is the one robe. There are stories that by the time we got to Huineng, the 6th ancestor of the lineage after Bodhidharma, so all through all through India, and then with Bodhidharma into China, and then to Huineng. At that point, the story goes, it is still the original artifact that is being transmitted. My background's in history. That kind of excites me a little bit. But it doesn't really matter. Okay? That this is still that robe. It's not an artifact, it's a living teaching. It's understandable how we could treat it like an artifact. People venerate it, and rightly so, for what it represents, for what it embodies. But it's a living teaching. We talk about live words. This is something that's come up a fair bit lately. I'm inclined to feel that in this particular instance, that something that might appear static embodies these live words. So we take up this practice, sewing the robe. The robe with the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha with each stitch. All the thread. But do we see that Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha with each stitch as we sew it? Cut, pull, stitches out, that is. Fold, celebrate, fret. Fear that the sewing master is coming around to look at what you've done. Do we see that? From the record of Dong Shan, case 30, the main case. Shen Shan was mending clothes when Dong Shan asked, "What are you doing?" "Mending," said Shen Shan. "In what way do you mend?" asked Dong Shan. "One stitch, just like the next," said Shen Shan. "We've been traveling together for 20 years and you still talk like that. How can you be so clueless?" "Well, how do you mend then?" said Shen Shan. Dong Shan replied, "With each stitch, the whole earth is spewing flame." I like that one a lot. This earth spewing flame. So in what way do you mend? Down that hall, in that room. Let's start there. In what way do you mend? Do you mend in the way of, I've got to get this done, the week is only so long? Do you mend in the way, oh God, I'm so horrible at this, I hope I never have to sew another thing in my life? Do you mend in the way, I love this is bliss, I could do this all day? Do you mend in the way of, I am definitely the worst sewer in this room? Do you mend in the way of, this is easy, I could be a sewing teacher? Be cool like Cashin. Yeah, put that on the t-shirt list. Do we mend one with Buddha, one with Dharma, one with Sangha? You can take that list, you can go through it, you can completely forget the whole sewing room. I am definitely the worst person in this room. I'm horrible. Everything's perfect. Whatever moment we're in, we're sewing the Buddha's robe. The mind that we have in the moment is the mind that is active and living and transmitting into whatever we do. The precepts keep coming around in this process. To sew the robe is to sew the teachings To take these teachings and put them into motion is to find our way into the moral and ethical realities of moving through the world. How we care for our precepts tells a lot about how we are approaching practice now, not how you are forever fixed permanently as a person. It tells a lot about how we are engaging the precepts now. So it needs to be maintained and protected, and it also means that when it's not so good, we can turn more fully towards it. How we care for this robe. And very literally, you're going to get one of these if you're going through the process. There's ways to care for it. And the way you take care of it, or don't, tells a lot about how you care for this life. For the entirety of the teachings, because they're right here. And how you care for each stitch, especially the ones that go badly. Some of the people that I'm helping, I tell them what to do at the next step, and some of them I warn that, oh, this line can't go as well as the other line because it is through more layers of fabric. And some people I don't tell, they discover that. They look at the back and they go, oh, this line, the back side of this doesn't look as good as the last one I did. There's a couple of hooks right there for us to judge, to evaluate, to project it back on ourselves, to project it out onto the robe. It's just a moment that's going different, that we can engage one way or another. So no matter how that's going for you, be curious about how your mind is showing up. There's the thing that's happening and your reaction to it, but watch your own mind as you do that. This is where sewing as practice is the teaching. This is where it can function like Zazen. In Zazen, yes, we are focused on the breath. We travel off into the story. We see it, acknowledge it, set it down, and come back to the breath. Every time we do that, we develop Joriki. That's the spiritual rep. Every time we can set it down and come back. But we are noticing the mind. We are noticing the mind's tendency to go or drift or sleep or grr or whatever. And being curious about that, at least just paying attention to the fact that it's happening. If there's a thing to be called progress on the cushion, that's it. Do we sew the robe because we have to have a robe to wear? Sure. It's part of the process. You go through, you get the marker, whatever it is. Whether it's a black robe or a big black robe or a flappy black robe or a gray robe. Blue robe, brown robe, has to get done if we're going to utilize these teachings. But if you're in the middle of that stitch to get it done, your experience is going to be very different than being into that middle of that stitch, one with Buddha, one with Dharma, one with Sangha. And along the way, you'll do both versions of that. Be curious, pay attention to how the mind is in each of those moments. It's pretty cool. We don't need a lot of analysis to see how that level of engagement, picking that real presence in what's actually happening versus being real clenched up against this idea of being done, translates into so many other things in our life. And just like with the Zendo, we have this little opportunity to engage in that practice as we help to transmit this robe in this sewing. At some point, we sew the last stitch. Oh, I love this story. Jukudo, Holly Knight, in her year, she was the last person to finish. And I sat next to her. And we sewed the last stitch, we tied the last knot. I held up the thread. I handed her the scissors. Here's the moment. She cut the frame. And fully in that moment, new needle, new thread, whip stitch. There wasn't a fixed sense of, I'm supposed to be done. It was going to be perfect. Now it's broken. It was cut, gap, stitch it up. So wonderful. So that last stitch is sewn. The robe and the Dharma name are presented. You place it on your head. You chant the verse. I wrote, "Are you done sewing the robe?" Well, it's obvious we're not. That stitching's done, and some of you be highly motivated to never pick up a needle again. That's fine. This needle and thread is a very beautiful practice in the Dharma. And I encourage people with an affinity for it to take it up. This is how I learned to sew, doing this. But there'll be a time when we finish that stitch and we'll receive it. We'll hear this name that makes us cry or go, "What?" As everyone else is crying because they get it and you don't, whatever. And we'll put it on our head and we will chant, "Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Tathagata's teaching, saving all sentient beings." I love that we chant that whether we have a Raksu or not at any stage. I really hope if you don't have a Raksu yet, you don't think you're just chanting along with the people this applies to. Because the robe is that embodied teaching. You've already stepped into this path. And when they say vast is the robe, again, these teachings of the Dharma, it's not, whatever, 11 by 7 hanging on straps or bed sheet size, tied around the shoulder. It is vast. It doesn't have an end to it. It covers everything. And you don't say, "I will wear the Tathagata's teaching." I wear it. It's there. In the Indian tradition, in the time of Shakyamuni, I love that it was the only clothing you had. You sewed 3 robes. What eventually came to be the Raksu was this larger robe that you essentially wore as a skirt. And then the Uttara robe, which is the equivalent of the current Kesa, and it was 7 panels. And then a larger one that was more like a travel robe or a shawl or something for warmth. Things change. You go into China, you go into colder climates, you do things with the robe and you wear them over existing cold or clothes because it's cold out. But you cover yourself with these robes. The early Sangha, very literally, that was all they covered themselves with. Your whole life in this moment, however your mind's engaging it, your whole life shows up in each stitch. Fully engaged, that's why the whole earth is spewing flames. There's a beautiful movie that brings this image to life in this idea of the whole world spilling between frames, because it's not really intimate enough to say the whole world is covered in fire. You have to be covered in fire. And so in the Ballad of Ricky Bobby, there's this one scene where Will Ferrell crashes and they're pulling him out of the wreck, and he's like, I'm on fire, and there's no visible flames at all, right? But he's like, I'm burning, and he's like stripping down and everything, and eventually there's black socks and running shoes, tighty whities, and the NASCAR helmet. That's all he's got on, and he's like, there's fires everywhere, it burns, which is a beautiful homage to, I guess there was this period of time in one of the venues of racings where they were experimenting with this different type of fuel that was either lightweight or high burning that literally was not visible on fire. It was just terrifying, which is why they got rid of it. So it's a beautiful, but there's just this moment where, think about that whole concept of stop, drop, and roll, how intimate and immediate and important it is when it is your head that is on fire. The whole world is spewing flames, but we can make it more intimate than that. So a couple of things to poke at you with from all of this. In what way do you sew the Buddha's robe? In what way do you sew your own life? Dongshan replied, with each stitch, the whole earth is spewing flames. You can go to that moment, you can go to that stitch, and you can kind of, Rinzan would say, gut it out. Or you can, again, be totally present with the presence. This is what the fire's about. With the presence of mind of someone who is living in a world that is completely on fire. You're not zoning out in that world. You're not, taking a quick bullet chess match on your phone when your hair is actually on fire. The moment demands are in time. It invites, it's just laying there waiting for our full attention and our full presence. And you might not find something as dramatic as a, world spewing flame would seem. The actual moment that is asking for that full attention might be uncomfortable or painful or confusing or boring as hell. But it's the thing that's actually your life. Well, actually, you know what? I didn't write this down, but I think the movie's called Click. This is like an Adam Sandler. Am I getting this right? Yeah. So there's this movie with Adam Sandler, and he finds this magic remote in the Beyond section of Bed Bath & Beyond. And he realizes he can fast forward past the boring, crappy parts. A fight with the family, a meeting he doesn't want to go to. But cool, smart remote, it starts learning his preferences. And so it starts automatically skipping him through the things he tends to skip through. And he misses a lot. Let's see. Reference Rinsen, Dongshan, Sensei, Will Ferrell, and Adam Sandler. Okay. It's probably pretty good for a talk. But yeah, a lot of things left on the table there. Tuned out. So how do we sew the Buddha's robe? How do we sew our own life? It's a live question more than anything else. So I have a question now, I have to write down the answer. I keep coming back to this, something I said actually in my Shuso letter at the start of last Ongo. There are questions that are more important to hold the question than to find the answer. Live in that question and then just let things emerge. How am I going to sew my life? I might need to sew it with a seam ripper sometimes, but that's for you to figure out. So let's hold that as a live question. And let's sew this one robe and one life together. Maybe so.